morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Friday Cafe. I'm Judy Carson, and I'm from the State Department of Education. We're talking about building support for family engagement. So to get to that, you need buy-in. You need top leadership support. You also need skill and expertise at every level of the organization. How do you do that? That's a long-term plan, and that's a strategic plan. And there are people that are thinking about this and making progress in this area. We happen to have one of them today. So we have Eyal Bergman, who is our conversation catalyst. And Eyal's a colleague that we first met while he was doing his work in the San Diego area and starting a district-level family and community engagement office, like many of our districts in Connecticut are doing. And he brings a special expertise that I think he's going to talk about, where he went into the community and listened to families in the community, and that informed his work a great deal. So Eyal is now back on the East Coast and studying at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So it's wonderful to have access to him. And I also want to say another feather in his cap that I'm especially proud of is he led the first replication of Friday Cafe. So San Diego was the first community to say, hey, I think we can do that. And they did it, and a tribute to him, even though he's left the district, it's still going. So I think that is something to be very proud of. So help me welcome Eyal Bergman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Buenos dias. Before I get started, I really do want to spend a quick second thanking Judy and Betsy. It's been a real honor and a real privilege to learn from the work of what Friday Cafe looks like. There's a big room here and a lot of people who have been to Friday Cafes before. That tells me that there's a real yearning and a real eagerness for this kind of community here. And I'm a big fan of building community, and I've learned a lot from you, so I just want to acknowledge you, and if we could give them a round of applause for the community that they've built here. I'm going to be talking about the work that we led in El Cajon, California, which is a city that's just east of San Diego. I'm going to talk about how we went about building champions. So I've started to move away from the language of generating buy-in to the language of building champions to support the work. Who's going to lead the work that we want to see happen when we're not around? Principals talk to principals all the time. Teachers talk to teachers all the time. Are they carrying the message forward in order to really make the work much richer and deeper on a day-to-day level? So I'm going to be sharing about what we did, some step-by-step, but I don't want to just blabber at you. I also want to make this a little bit interactive and a little bit dynamic and give you a chance to think about the different steps along my journey and how that could be a helpful reference point for you now and moving forward in your journey to the extent that that matters or that's important to you. So I usually, before I get going, I like to ask, who's in the room. So I'm curious, how many folks here work, if you could just show by a show of hands, how many folks here work with families in schools like every day? Like that's your primary responsibility is to support families. Okay. How many of you are teachers, classroom teachers? Yeah, no, teachers are teaching right now, I guess, right? It's Friday. This was the same thing in Friday Cafe too, but I always felt it was important to ask. Teachers are critical. Any school administrators? Okay. Any district administrators? Any CREC or folks that work in sort of a non-district but supporting school-based work? That's kind of an umbrella term, I guess. Okay. Anybody else that I have? Can you shout if I've missed you? What? You just shout it out. Great. Any parents who are here advocating for kids? Even if that's not your job title, you can raise your hand if you're a parent and you advocate for kids. Okay. Anybody retired and want to just spend time here? We used to have retired folks come to our Friday Cafe in San Diego. It was great. I was like, that's the dream. Okay. Before I get too into the work, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the work we did in El Cajon, but I also like to share a little bit about my journey and how I came to the work, and talk about my family and my upbringing a little bit to try to center in what's really important to me. I come from a very long and deep lineage of immigrants and migration. So my grandparents were born in Eastern Europe at the early part of the 20th century. And in 1933, my grandfather was part of the last wave of Jews to leave Europe, and he moved to Argentina. Ellis Island, so after the stock market crash in '29, Ellis Island basically closed. There were no immigrants coming in the early 30s, or there were very few. And so, but Argentina's economy was booming, and so they were welcoming more and more refugees and immigrants from Europe. And that's how my family ended up in Argentina. And my grandfather was 13 years old when he left Poland, and that's where his education stopped. And when he arrived in Buenos Aires, he was selling shoelaces on the street. So he would like get on the street and actually tie people's shoes together. But he didn't feel like it was demeaning or degrading. He was happy to be alive, seeing what was happening to his family in Poland. He was eager to learn Spanish. He's always been a happy and a humble person, grateful for life's privileges, and that really got passed down in my family. And then my father and my parents were both born and raised in Buenos Aires. They graduated from high school in 1976, and that is the year of the most recent coup in Argentina. And so while my parents weren't really politically active, being at university was not the best place to be at that time. There was a lot of state repression. And we have family members that were made to disappear and never reappeared again. And so with that political climate, my parents left. And my dad's older brother had gone to Israel. There was a big move. Israel was trying to recruit as many Jews from around the world to come to Israel throughout the later 20th century. And that's how my parents ended up in Israel, to go to college. And they went to college, and then they had a baby, and that was me. And then they were poor, and they got a job offer in California. And so, like another wave of immigration, they moved again across the world. So I was about this big when I landed in California. I was 18 months old. And so I grew up American. But I grew up in an Argentine household with an Israeli name. So that explains my name. And so, my brothers were born in the United States. I grew up, I lived in California, lived in the Northwest as well, ended up coming to the East Coast for college. But to me, that really deep immigrant root was very strong for me. I didn't learn English until I went to school. My parents very much felt that their Argentinidad was like front and center. They actually ended up moving back there. That's really where they wanted to be. So for me, when I graduated from college, I knew that the work I wanted to do was connected to immigrant work. Is connected to my own roots as being a Latino immigrant in this country. And so I was really lucky to land in a community-based nonprofit organization in Montgomery County, Maryland, that was working with Latino youth and families. And that's where I really got to do my first real work, my first real community work. And I remember when I was 22 years old, and I was really excited to do work. I was really excited to have this job that I loved already. And I approached a mentor at the time who I just wanted to, I rushed up to her while she was making photocopies, and I asked her, what is the thing that you think is the most important thing that I could be doing to help these kids? And she just stopped me and said, just listen to them. And at the time I was like, okay, no, but what are the actual things that I could be doing? And somehow that has just really stayed with me. And I did a lot of listening to kids. And I just asked them to share their stories with me. And if you've worked with kids long enough, if you ask them to talk about themselves, they will. They're eager to be heard. Families are eager to be heard. And it was pretty shocking to me that you would have adolescent kids, 15, 16, 17 years old, who were telling these really rich stories about their lives, and nobody had asked them before. And parents would tell you the same thing. And what I found was that school staff were having a really hard time knowing what questions to ask, how to connect with the families. And so with that type of work, I ended up trying to work closer with school principals and with teachers and to try to explain a little bit more about what the community was going through. And they asked us to lead some trainings with teachers and lead some trainings with principals, and I found that work to be really enriching. And I decided at that point to start to pivot my career, and I went and got a master's of education so I could learn more about, what are the things that school people talk about, like learn the language of schools a little bit more and learn about learning and learn about teaching. And so I had the chance to go to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I had the wonderful opportunity to learn under Karen Mapp. And that's where I learned that there's a whole field for this. I had no idea that there's a whole dedicated community that is working on making schools more responsive to the communities that they serve. And so now I am a staunch ally in this work, and this is what my life's calling has become. So I like to share that so that you have a sense of where I come from. And getting into the weeds a little bit more, can I just, by a show of hands, how many people have seen this before? Great. Okay, so I hadn't seen this before. This is Karen Mapp's dual capacity building framework for family school community partnerships. It occurs to me that if I can hardly read the words from here, you probably can't really read the words. But I will start with this challenge at the top, which really is, I think, gets at the point of it. Teachers are not trained on how to do this work, and yet they're expected to know how to do the work. That's totally unfair. Teachers who become principals then replicate the practice that they had seen when they were teachers. So then we just have and then they don't know how to onboard new teachers. And so we have a systemic process where if the training never happens, then the expectations are never built and best practices are never demonstrated. And so then the work can't be owned by the people who are delivering the work with children themselves. So that is a really critical feature of how I conceptualize the problem, right? And because teachers haven't been trained and don't necessarily know how to do the work at scale, there's always going to be all-stars. There's always teachers and principals that believe that this is their purpose and this is at their core. But in order to get a more mass distribution of folks to be really engaged, it's really, I think it matters to do a lot of the training. So I took it upon myself to see this framework as primarily an educator capacity building framework. So before I get too far, I want to start by doing an activity that highlights what I think is the most important part of this framework. So I said I don't want to blabber at you for too long. Just make this dynamic. Everybody has paper at their table, right? Okay, if I can ask you to write down 5 activities, just make a quick column, 5 activities that you have participated in either as a parent or as a community or family liaison or as a school administrator, 5 family engagement activities that you have participated in, or the types of activities that are consistent. So if you run activities at your school, like what are the common activities that take place at your school? If you're an administrator, what are the normal ones? So a lot of folks will write down like back to school night or parent-teacher conferences or college awareness nights or whatever it is that is designed to be a family engagement activity. Just write down 5 typical ones that you've been involved with.
If you use the back of the evaluation
So, does anybody need more time? Okay. What Dr. Matt likes to say is that the bread and butter of the framework is really in the middle sections. So the brown section and the green section. The brown section are the opportunity conditions. These are the, as you know, these are the things that programs should look like in order to be most successful. And on the left side of the brown box, you have the process conditions, like what are the actual activities should look like. And on the right side are the organizational conditions, how to make it last within an organization. So these are the process conditions. I like to bring this up as much as I can because I think that this is really at the core and the bread and butter of what I think makes really effective family engagement. And it's what I was striving for. What I was trying to get to was this excellent, excellent work. But it doesn't just happen if principals don't give you the okay on their campus when you're new to their district or they're new to your school. So I'm like, if ever there was a preaching to a choir moment. So this is what I say. I was really needing principals to be champions for the depth of the work that I wanted to lead in the school district, but I needed principals to want to own the work. So what I did was just try to start to address the needs and concerns that they had that were really about them. So before I get into what I did there, I'm trying to make this in a way where I will share what I did, but then you can also have moments to try to track my progress along based on where you're at now. So I'm going to ask you to think about who's a current ally that you would like to make a champion. So if you could think about somebody in your context that is maybe your school principal or a teacher or a potential funder or a colleague in a different department that you want to advocate for your work. Everybody has somewhere from where they sit of who they want to say, you know, that person really believes in this work, but they haven't owned the work. They haven't been champions for the work. They haven't been talking about family engagement to the colleagues that I want them to be talking about. I want to build the ownership and the buy-in. So take a minute and think about who's a current ally that you want to make a champion and write that person's name down. And if you want to think of 2 or 3 people, you can too. It has to be someone that, like, there's a good chance that this would work for. Because if it's somebody that keeps stifling you, then that won't work. I want to share a quick note on a quick note on authority. Authority matters. So the person you've selected ideally has some level of authority. Now, there's a lot of different types of authority. There's positional authority, so that person is a boss. That person has access to resources, funding, people, other types of capital, right? So there's a positional authority. There is also personal authority, so maybe that person carries themselves with a certain honor and integrity that other people admire. Or they speak with conviction, or they are regarded as experts. So other people really listen to who they are. They arrive with a certain personal authority that people respect. And then there's interpersonal authority. You know that there's a lot of teachers that are not like department, they don't run the math department or English department. They're not like the 3rd grade chair, you know, but when they pipe up in a staff meeting, everybody's listening, right? So these are people that you want to have on your side. These are your champions, right? So if you have chosen somebody that you don't think has some level of authority, you may want to rethink the person because you're going to need that kind of leverage in order to move the work forward. So in the world of organizing that I come from, we talk a lot about not being afraid of power. You need power in order to make change because either you have it or you don't, and those who have it do what they want with it, right? So, a little bit about, the people that I chose were principals. That was mine. The district principals And I slowly just started to get to know some of them, and I just wanted to get in front of them and learn about them. So I'll talk a lot about what that looked like in a minute. But a little bit of context, because obviously like where you're from, where you sit is how you stand. So has anybody, can you raise your hand if you've been to San Diego before? All right. Anybody ever been to El Cajon? That seems unlikely. You have? Well, wonderful. So El Cajon is in the east part of the county. You can see the horizontal line there, right? That's the border, right? There's the ocean. These are really important, rich contextual factors that affect our student population. El Cajon is just east of San Diego, like 20-minute drive, 30 minutes to the beach at most. This is what was happening in the 10 years before I arrived in El Cajon, or I arrived in 2014. But El Cajon started to have a dramatic increase in its low-income community. From about half of the student body today, it's over 3/4 of the student population, a very rapid increase. There's no chance you could read that. The green line, this is the change in the percentage of students that speak a language other than English at home. So immigrant households, like mine. The green line is all students who speak a language other than English at home. The blue line is Spanish speakers. The red line is Middle Eastern languages, primarily Arabic, and Chaldean, which is a Christian sect primarily from Iraq. You can see the green line starts 10 years ago at about 30, so about a third of students. 10 years later, it's half of all students. It's a really dramatic increase, right? And it's driven primarily, like it's entirely driven by the rapid increase in our Middle Eastern refugee community. So El Cajon had a Middle Eastern refugee community going back decades. But then after the most recent Iraq war, the US State Department started to resettle a lot of Iraqi refugees. And a lot of them were coming to El Cajon because that's where the existing community was. It's basically Detroit and El Cajon. But at that time, Detroit was hemorrhaging jobs. And San Diego has a pretty robust economy. And so we were starting to receive a lot and a lot and a lot of Middle Eastern refugees. And what's happening is that there are no administrators that speak Arabic. There are very few teachers that speak Arabic. And so there was a big yearning in the district for knowing how to help parents. But I will frame this as, what I learned was that most folks wanted the Middle Eastern parents to know what they should do on a school campus. Please tell them how to park their cars appropriately. Please tell them that they can't put that their children can't put hands on other children on the playground. And I say, please understand that they're coming from war. And so I wanted to have my hand raised. I wanted to have all 5 process conditions. I wanted to do really excellent family and community engagement work. But what they wanted was for me to tell parents what to do, right? So I was like, great, you're going to give me a job. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And I started that way, but I did it very intentionally. I did it, and I had the chance. What they wanted to do was they wanted us to meet with every newcomer family as they were arriving. So it was me and 2 community liaisons. Community liaisons would go out and they would meet with every newcomer family to try to tell parents what the school wanted. Meanwhile, I was thinking, well, it probably should be you because you see their kids every day. We're central office staff. But the point was to go out to the schools and start to build relationships with principals and ask them what matters to them, right? So I'll get into what that looked like in a minute. But I tried my best with the newcomer welcome meetings to make it as parent-centric as possible. So we had our community liaisons. They would go out to the school. We wouldn't ask families to come to a central office. We went out to the school because they're all neighborhood schools. And we would meet with families. We would try to introduce them to front office staff so that they would understand who the familiar faces were. And then we had different packets for each of the different schools so that they would get information tailored to their school. And they would get a little welcome letter from me that had their teacher's name and contact information, the principal, the counselor, the different people at the school that really mattered to this child. A little guide. I like to say this is the only English version we ever use. I only use the English version for presentations or to give out to people because they were all in their native languages. We had it in 5 different languages. With just some tips, try to keep it basic. A little bit about school attendance and why that matters. This is our academic calendar. So it's incredibly hard to understand. So we tried to explain it. A little bit about getting low-cost internet. A little bit about getting enrolled in English classes if they wanted. And then some information about specifics about their school. So what that allowed us to do was to start to get out into the community and listen to a lot of parents and what they were going through. And just as importantly for the long-term vision, it was about getting in front of principals and asking them what they care about. This is the primary animating question that has to do with organizing. What is it that you're outraged about? It's not about getting in front of a group and demonstrating rage. It's about articulating why you're outraged about the current state of affairs. So I would ask principals well, what are you working on? What is it that you care about? Some principals really care about, blended learning. They really are very tech savvy type principals. Some principals care a lot more about social emotional learning. Some principals care more about making sure that the bus shows up on time. Different principals care about different things, but you can't find out about what they care about until you ask or until you really get to know them. So I'm going to stop here and stop talking about what I was asking about the principals and ask you to now reflect on your ally/future champion and ask you to write down what their context was, what their current context is, what do they care about the most, and what keeps them up at night. So from what you know about them, so again, the context for us was a rapid surge in the refugee community. They wanted us to support them with that. And then once I had that, I would start to ask principals more about what they care about, what keeps them up at night, what is the real animating feature that they get excited about. Try to think about it from their perspective and less from your perspective. It's not about, I need you to approve this parent program. It's more like, what is it that they care about? And it could have nothing to do with families. So take a moment and just write down what it is that your champion that you wrote down cares about the most, completely unrelated to families. Or maybe it is families, but just take a moment, write it down, and then share that with your neighbors. I'm going to bring us back together. I'm wondering if there's anybody here that would like to share. If maybe we get 1 or 2 or 3 examples of who's your champion and what do they care about. And I want to be clear. The principals that I was working with in El Cajon, they care about families, but it wasn't their primary concern. They were primarily concerned with X teacher or Y playground incident or X fire that was happening, that was going on. So if anybody would like to stand up and share who their future champion is and what they care about the most, just to hear from the crowd.
My champion is not a principal, but rather a supervisor in the central office, a bilingual ESL supervisor who is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. She knows what it's like to come to a country without the language, to learn the language. She is now working on her doctorate. She has young children. I mean, it's almost like she has it all, but she does it all, and her heart is everywhere. And I think her biggest thing that keeps her up at night is thinking about a family that has just arrived, and do they have their basic needs met? You don't need to worry about how they're doing in school if they don't have a place to live, a place for emotional even spiritual support. People need to feel that their needs are being met, and as you said, that somebody's actually listening to them, and then putting them in a school environment and supporting them once they're there. And so she is a champion. She will be my champion for sure, and she will make sure that every parent feels very welcome and every child feels welcome. And I think another piece is the follow-up. It's not just saying, hello, here's the packet, welcome to our school, welcome to our community. It's weekly or bi-weekly calling and saying, how are you doing? You know, is there anything I can do for you? Introducing them to people that might have similar interests and things. So my champion, she's a very special person.
Great, thank you for sharing. Does anybody else have a current ally that they want to turn into a champion that has an area of interest that might be a little bit different than family engagement?
So I have an assistant principal who is really super upset about our rising chronic absenteeism, and she's trying to figure out what is it that is the crux of the issue. And so she and I have had some conversations around engaging families around it, but she's still not quite convinced that it's a family thing, and that it's a student thing. And I'm like, how do you separate the two? But I think that she's along those lines.
Chronic absenteeism is a great entry point into better family engagement work. It's a really good example. Thank you. Anybody else?
I actually am looking at it from different points of view. I just recently changed my job position, and I left a 14-year job working with the Nurturing Family Network, providing expectant moms with diversity, educating them on how to become better parents and making sure their kids are going to school and all of that stuff. And so now I'm currently working with Bergman College as director of partnerships, community partnerships. And so I'm looking at this as educating the parents, talking to parents about educating themselves with higher education, going to school, just looking at it in that way. And I'm not sure how I would go about doing it, but that's the way that I'm kind of looking at it. We have to kind of educate the parents so that the cycle continues.
Do you have an ally that you think could help further the work, that could become a champion, that in order to build a broader coalition?
I don't have a specific ally. I'm looking at it as the different organizations.
Sure.
Whether it's the SNAP program,
Sure.
the nonprofits, which I've worked with for many, many years.
So those could be examples. So if it's very possible that we're so busy trying to do our job that it can be hard to know who. If we're trying to build a broader coalition, if we're trying to build a really broad group and try to get support from other leaders, it can be sometimes the first step is really thinking who is it that I need to convince to put their skin in the game, right? So that really is the first step. So thank you very much for sharing. Can we have a round of applause for our sharers? The next question is building trust. Trust is at the very core and at the very nature of our work. And so I felt that it was my duty to be building trust with the allies that I wanted to become champions. Not just because it helps build the work, but because it models what we want to see between families and educators, right? There's nothing that we can do. CareMap is working on a new framework, so just a little teaser that's going to be released this summer. And the relational piece of the process conditions is going to be given an extra boost. This is an acknowledgement that nothing can happen without deep relational trust. And I say that because I want to dig a little bit deeper into really how you know that you trust somebody. And it's not just a matter of we've built trust and rapport, but I'm personally very influenced by the work of a gentleman named Anthony Bryk, B-R-Y-K. He did some really great research on trust in schools. There's a whole book, but there's also like a 3-pager online if you want to look it up. And what he identifies is 4 key factors that lead to trust amongst different people that work in schools. Respect, integrity, competence, and personal regard. So, yeah, Bryk. It's B-R-Y-K. So, Anthony Bryk and Barbara Schneider is his co-author. And what I think is really helpful about this is that it helps you as a practitioner think, what do I need to demonstrate to this person so that they feel trust in me? It's not enough to say, I want people to trust me. It's, I need to demonstrate trustworthiness in another person. So when I was working a lot with teachers and parents, I would say to them, how are you demonstrating that you respect this person? You can say, I respect them. But if they don't feel heard, or you're not actively thinking to yourself, I need to show this person that I listen to them, then how do they know that you respect them, right? So then I have a series of questions that I like to ask teachers to think about. And I'm going to share these with you today. So think about your ally that you want to become a champion. Are you listening to this person well? And the answer to that question doesn't matter as much as the answer to, how am I demonstrating to this person that I'm listening to them? Think about that. Am I demonstrating integrity? So am I demonstrating that I keep my word? So if I say I'm going to do something, I mean, you know this with families. You say you're going to do something, you don't do it, that's it. That's what I learned with kids. Competence is about respecting that they do a good job at their job. Everybody wants to feel like they're doing a good job. Nobody wants to be made to feel like they're not doing a good job. This is a critical element of mistrust between families and schools. Schools don't tell parents usually, well, some do I guess, but it's not typical to hear a school say, you're doing a bad job as a parent. But they send all sorts of messages that make parents feel that way. So what are we doing to show parents that we think that they're a good parent? And what are we doing, therefore, to show our ally, like, I'll just use your example, like, how are you showing your assistant principal that you think that they're doing a great job as an assistant principal? Right? Or if you're looking at community partners, how do you demonstrate to the community partner that you think that they're doing a good job at their job? And lastly, like, just, you know, golden rule, like, be kind to people. You know, that it's I care about you as a human. I care about you as a person. And how am I demonstrating that? Am I asking you about your kids? Am I, you know, whatever it is. So these are some questions that I have pulled on and that I used a lot with principals, like to show principals that I'm trustworthy. So if I want to get a principal to use their money for a project that I'm going to deliver, I need them to believe that I think that they're a good principal. Because a principal doesn't want to invest any trust in me if they're hearing that I think that they're not a good principal. Or if I go in and I'm straight about work and I never ask them about their personal life, then they have less of a reason to trust me, I think. If I go into their office and I just talk at them and I don't listen to them, then they're probably less likely to feel respected. So it's about being very conscious about the behaviors that we're demonstrating to others that build trustworthiness in us. So this plus the principals having a need, they got an itch, I'm gonna scratch your itch. So you got this need around refugee parents. I will do something to scratch your itch. And that helped build the trust in my competence to solve their problem. And in the meantime, I was working on building relationship. So those are the fundamental key parts of organizing that I think helps to build excitement. And the next step after that is how do you get principals to talk to, in my case it was, I know principals, there's this like fraternity or sorority of principalhood that they respect and trust each other as a core more than they do anybody else, because they get so many directives from the central office. There's so many demands on them on a minute-by-minute basis that, like, if I'm not making their job easier, then they don't want to talk to me, right? And I know that if I can get a couple of principals to get excited about this work, that they're going to talk to each other. And that's how I ended up getting principals calling me out of the blue, because they had heard from one of their colleagues. I don't want to shortchange the importance of money in all of this. We got a $400,000 grant from the Kellogg Foundation because we showed we're starting to do this work. The district has put its skin in the game with my salary and the 2 community liaisons, and we have a vision for how we would implement the dual capacity framework. And we have all of these grand ideas. And so we asked for a seed grant that would be a 2.5-year grant, and that would end. We said, we don't want this to be an operational grant. We don't want you to pay for ongoing salaries, because foundations don't want to pay for that. What I like to tell people about the work when I share this is, please don't get hung up on the fact that we had money to do the work. Because the money to do the work helped to do the work, but it had nothing to do with building the initial buy-in. The initial buy-in happened well before we had the Kellogg grant. So it would be the wrong lesson to take from here, oh, he had money to do the work, I can't do it because I don't have the money, I don't have the grant. But if you have the grant, you can accelerate the work. That's the advantage. What did we do? The dual capacity building framework is a dual capacity building framework. Teachers, administrators, families. So we built a parent PD and a teacher PD. And we put a lot of money towards evaluation because it was a seed grant. We wanted to have data so we could go after more grants, and so we could know what we were doing, so that we could show that we were the way to build trust with grant makers is to show them competence by evaluating your work. So, and then I put that we chose 6 sites in 2 years. So by this point, I already had good relationships with principals. And so I proposed this project, which was a 1-year project that would last 1 year. We had 3 schools in year 1, 3 schools in year 2. And I went to the principals that I already had a good relationship with, because I knew that they were already allies, and maybe they were like baby champions, and that they could become super champions if they could see the work in more depth. And I knew that it would require their work. They needed to do work regarding this. It couldn't be like I come in, deliver all the work, and then I leave. They had to do some of the work. So the allies that had become baby champions who were eager for a little bit more, those were the ones I prioritized. So that's why I've been talking a lot about picking your ally and your champion. But teachers have enough of the central office telling them what they need to do. Rightfully so. It's hard to be a teacher. So what I did was I first talked to the principal and had conversations about what the work would look like to be a member of this project. And then if they gave the okay, I went in front of their staff and I took a staff meeting and I shared what the project would consist of, and then I opened it up for a vote. An anonymous online vote. They had a week to decide if they wanted to vote it up or down. It was one question. Do you want the Kellogg project at your site or not? And it had to be over 80% approval in order to be considered. And all of them were over 90%. Because teachers want the work. I mean, I feel like if the principal's owning it and the principal's saying, I'm going to do work, and they can see that it's a strong project, they're likely to approve, right? So off we went. We had a start of a project, and then we started to accelerate and deepen the work. And what did it look like? I think that a lot of this will probably sound pretty familiar to you. How many of you have delivered a parent university, or a parent workshop, or lessons to parents? Okay? What we did was we built on a curriculum that's developed by an organization out of LA called Families in Schools. The program is called Reading Roads. It takes a very Freirean notion, like this idea that the answers to the problems in the community are in the community itself. That's the mentality that I come from. And it helped parents learn how to read with their kids. And so the curriculum is all about things that matter to the community. So lesson 1 is about family. So we read a book that's all about family. And then we talk about our families. And we do lessons and activities related to family. Lesson 2 is all about community, because that matters to members of the community. So we read a book that's about community. And then they take the books home, they read them with their kids, they come back, and we debrief. But the most important thing is, if you look at this, so the one on the right is an Arabic session, the one on the left is a Spanish session. We did it in English, Arabic, and Spanish. It's an 8-session curriculum that had reading roads and also a behavior, like how to build positive behavior discipline. And if you look on the right, like, you don't know who the teacher is. Maybe you can tell, but it's a flat structure. We're all in this together. We all have a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of modeling. Parents that don't want to read don't have to. Try to create the safe space. Things like childcare, things like food, those are just obvious. That's how you have to have those things so that parents don't have to be worried about those things. That I know is preaching to the choir too. We also had like positive play, and the idea was to make it really dynamic. And the real important thing is that you're building community. Maybe they come the first time because they want to do right by their kids, or like, okay, I could have some childcare. They come for those things. They stay for the community. They keep coming back for that reason. And then also parties are great. The one thing that I think that we did that really separated the work that we were doing, that really helped to deepen the ownership at the school level, was that we had a community liaison from my department, centrally funded, central office staff, co-facilitating with a teacher from the school. It's very common for parent work in schools to have the facilitator come in from somewhere else, deliver the program with parents, and then off they go. And the teachers have no idea what's going on. So how are they supposed to love the work and own the work and demand the work if they're not seeing the work? So you may have 30, 40 teachers in a school. You don't need 30, 40 facilitators. You need one. You need to start with one. And we use the Kellogg grant to pay a stipend to be able to train them and for the materials. But the idea was find that teacher ally that is dying to do the work, compensate them, because we need to put our money where our mouth is. And then they start to talk to each other in the lunchroom and their great collaboration meetings. And then when the year is over and the funding is over, they're going to their principal saying they want to do it again. And so that sort of building the coalition, we have to bring people in and have them own the work. That to me was really, really critical. We also did a lot of teacher PD. This is the stuff that I really love to do the most, to be perfectly honest. We need to change teacher mindsets. So this is a poverty simulation. Has anybody ever participated in one of these big poverty simulations? Oh, it's fantastic. It's like a room like this. You've got these tables of family, like each teacher is randomly assigned to a different family unit that is living in poverty. And there are different case scenarios. And so maybe one family is like a family of 5, 2 parents, 3 kids. typically middle class, but they lost their job and they're starting to eat through their savings. And another family is maybe a single mother raising 2 kids. Another family might be homeless or living on welfare or undocumented, and so they struggle to access resources. And then they have to live a month in the life of this. They have to basically inhabit either an adult or a child in this scenario. And we simulate a month by having 4 weeks that are 15 minutes each week. So 15 minutes, week 1, 2-minute weekend. 15 minutes, week 2, 2-minute weekend. And the tables around the room are all the service providers that people in poverty tend to have to deal with. So social services, you have to go buy food at the grocery store, you deal with the police, your mortgage company, your utility company. And what ends up happening is that everybody gets really stressed out because the money doesn't go far enough. People are taking advantage of each other. The ethical lines that they thought they had suddenly became a lot blurrier. Principals had to participate. We had board members participate. We had cabinet members participate. And the idea was to start to build a collective and a shared understanding of what that looks like. If you want to know more about the poverty simulation, you look up the Missouri Community Action Network. They're the ones that created it. You have to pay $2,000 and they send you an enormous box with all of the materials. Again, it's the Missouri Community Action Network. Home visits are the best. They're the best. Home visits are the best. I put these under teacher PD and not parent work because I think that the long-term impact on teachers scales the work. They see kids get so excited. I'm telling you, even adolescents that are rolling their eyes remember it for the rest of their lives. They remember that teacher came to their house. You just ask parents, what are your hopes and dreams for your kids? I would start there. And just listen. And 99% of the time, when teachers and parents are interacting, it's at the school. It's on the school's turf. And the other 1% of the time is like when they run into each other in the grocery store. It's never on the parents' home turf. We need to even the power dynamics. And I think that a lot of teachers actually gravitate to this type of work. And once teachers start to own the work, what I did was start to build a coalition of teachers that were eager to spread the work. And so then they would start to convince other teachers, and they would start to take other teachers along with them. Design thinking sessions. We did these cool PDs where, so our 3 main languages were English, Spanish, and Arabic. And we would bring families from each of those language groups into the school. And they would be seated with teachers like at each of these tables, just like this. You would have 2 or 3 teachers and 2 or 3 parents, 2 or 3 teachers, 2 or 3 parents at each of the tables. We would do a little icebreaker. Then we would ask all of the Arabic-speaking parents to please come to the front of the room. We had a table here. And what we did was all the teachers had to wear the simultaneous interpretation devices, not the parents. And the parents and we just have a conversation. What are your hopes and dreams for your kids? What was your schooling experience like when you were a kid? What do you love about this school? What do you think could be improved about the school? What are all the beautiful, wonderful things you want to say to teachers? Keep it positive. And 2 rules, really. One is the parents are not allowed to mention anybody by name, right? And 2, teachers are not allowed to ask any clarifying questions. They're just listening, right? Taking notes, right? We do that with the Arabic, with the Spanish, and with the English. And we also have students participate. And so what ends up happening after that, that's the empathy building stage of the design thinking process. And then they go back to their tables and they brainstorm, like based on what you heard from parents, teachers and parents working together, what do you think would be a cool idea to improve the family engagement of this school? And they just brainstorm. No bad ideas. They just quick rapid fire. And then together they choose on one, and then they build it out. And then they present their idea to the full group, and then there's a big voting. And then they vote based, using stickies. You can choose how many are your best ideas. And then, based on what emerges from the school community, we build a
a committee to carry the work forward that's made up of parents, students, and teachers. I will say, this sounds a lot better than it comes out sometimes, okay? Because the principal really needs to own this, because the committee needs to be run by the principal at the end of the day. So I'm happy to send any materials that anybody wants. I don't own any of this. The other PD that we did, and this one was super easy and really transformative, we put teachers on a school bus and we just took them to places in the community. So this is us at a mosque, and this is us at the Chaldean church. And the imam, my job was to go out and just meet people, like the partnership. I was a partnership guy. I would just go and introduce myself. And folks love schools in the community. The imam at the mosque, the pastor at the church, they welcomed us. They're like, you want to bring teachers here? That's fantastic. We'd love to have teachers here. They have food available for you. They have tea open for you. And the teachers are like, wow, it's a whole new experience for them. So this is the kind of work we were doing. And so what ended up happening from there was that the demand for the work grew. What happened was, towards the end of the first year, I had the chance to address the principals council. That's all the principals in the district. And I turned it over to the principals at the 3 schools that were part of the first year. And all I did was I asked them, please share your experience from this year. And it was really positive, and it was really glowing. And then after that, I got a lot of principals that wanted it at their school. And with that leverage comes power. And what I noticed was, there's a lot of Title I money. So you know that Title I money, there's a certain part of Title I money that has to be used for family engagement. That's not news in this room. It's not enough. So 1% of all Title I money in a district has to be used on family engagement, and 95% of all of that money has to be sent to the schools. So what happened in our case is that schools would have maybe like $8,000 or $12,000. That's really not enough to do a lot of work. But I went to my superintendent, and I got his buy-in because he could see the demand that was growing too. And he wanted to be part of a winning strategy. That's the other thing. Politicians, leaders, they want to latch onto something that's working so that they can claim it too. So what we did was, I proposed to him, like, if I can get principals to put in a certain amount of money, will you match it? And he said yes. I had a supportive leader. And so I went to all the Title I principals. I was like, I got a match for you. How much you want to put in? So some schools put in $10,000. Some schools put in $20,000. Some schools put in $15,000. Different amounts. Whatever they could afford. Whatever they felt was important. Suddenly, $20,000 becomes $40,000. And now we're talking. You can start hiring staff with that kind of money. And so that's how our staff went from being 3 to being 12. And we ended up hiring a whole group of liaisons to be able to start to do the work at the school in relationship with the teachers at the school. And then after the first year of the grant, the principals had forgotten that I had told them that it's a 1-year grant. And they said, so who's going to pay for Parent University? And I was like, you are going to pay for Parent University. But I will help you by funding some of your home visits if you pay for some home visits. The matching process is beautiful. The matching process is really great because, A, you need to put your money where your mouth is. If you really believe that this is important, prove it. Talk is cheap. So first of all, it generates skin in the game. Second, what it does is it makes it easier. It's an easier on-ramp. It's an easier barrier to entry when I say, you put in 10, you get 20. You put in 20, you get 40. Choose your own adventure. And I will work behind the scenes to make all the machinations work. Right? And I supervise the staff. I do their evaluations. We meet as a team once a week. But the rest of the time, they're all out at the sites reporting to the principal at the site. So they ended up putting more money in, and slowly they liked the work more. They wanted more PD. Schools that weren't participating in the match were willing to buy for the PD. So the match, the last part about the match that's really important is that it dissuades people from pulling funding. Because if you're getting 40, but you're only paying 20, why would you pull out your 20? And so that way, suddenly, $150,000 becomes $300,000. That seems pretty stable. That was the primary work that we did. And that's our team. That's some of our team. I miss them. We also did a lot of advocacy work. So because of my organizing and lobbying experience, this is us in Washington, D.C. with our superintendent and our board chair. And then this is us with our elected member of Congress in a school with recently arrived refugees. Thank you. And then we had teachers write stories about their immigrant kids that were really touching. And then it just builds like excitement and ownership together. So that, I think, also helped to build the credibility of the department, that we're fighting for more resources. We're not just asking you to pay for yours. So I'm going to ask you to maybe think for a minute to your future ally, or no, to your current ally, to your future champion. What do they care about? How can you help them resolve a challenge that matters to them? People are pretty sick of being talked at. They want to be listened to. And then I started Friday Cafe, and it was really a really wonderful, beautiful experience. I met a lady named Carol, who is a really wonderful human who has been in the work for a long, long time. She's now retired. And we met at the conference and had a chance to hear Judy's presentation about Friday Cafe. And we started launching it in San Diego, and there was the same thing. There was a yearning. There was a hunger for it. And you can't see the pictures that well, but it still exists, much like our department. So very proud of that. A lot of people, they think they have great intentions. They say, great, we're going to have a family liaison. You get to do the family engagement work. That's one problem. That's one unintended consequence. And the other one is that they end up being another office assistant. Yeah. So my relationships with principals matter. I held the reins real tight, real tight. I gave principals a list of the things that they can do and a list of the things they cannot do. Okay? I dissuaded the principals from having the liaison sit in the office. Now, I have mixed feelings about that because, parents come into the office. But I think that to start the work, if they had their own space, they would be seen differently, especially in the early days. And it was just constant conversations with principals. And I alerted the union, because the union doesn't want people working out of class. They don't want them working in different job duties that are not assigned. That's the kind of thing that they get all excited about. Another thing I'll say is that we also paid for liaisons out of Title III, so English learner funds. Look, I think that the most important thing is to have a good idea and to know which philanthropists want to fund what. So the big national philanthropists that pay for family and community engagement are the Kellogg Foundation, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, who else? Carnegie. But the truth is that these are also these are big, these are very competitive also. I think a lot of times the local grants, we got grants from Kaiser Permanente of San Diego County, these are grants that are a little bit simpler, and I would say this community is the place to connect with who's working in the community and try to leverage who does what with whom. Well, I'm happy to stick around if anybody would like to chat. I'll be here.